basically putting themselves on a dangerous plane with no autopilot and then smoking and drinking for the entire thing instead. How that lasted for as long as it did, I don't know. But by regulations today, that wouldn't have been allowed. Hello and welcome to today's Car Nerd. I am Jason Hassett, the aforementioned Car Nerd, and today I'm going to be talking to you about Alfa Romeo, which is a company that is deeply embedded inside my heart along with Lamborghini, and I love all things Italian. If you do too, let me know what Italian cars you'd like me to tell you the history of in the comments below. However, today we're going to be talking about three fantastic concept cars that the company built in the 50s, which unfortunately, like 90% of concept cars, never went into production, but that's neither here nor there. Before I jump into it, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. It would mean a world to me. So thank you, sit back, relax, and let's jump into it. Prior to World War II, Alfa Romeo was a luxury car maker, and it was up there with the big boys. It was a proper Italian car maker making incredibly, spectacularly luxurious and beautiful flowing cars of the 20s and 30s until war broke out. And obviously Mussolini was behind Hitler and a lot of bad things happened for Italy. So then in the 1940s, the Italians along with the Germans had to make reparations and things weren't going well for the country as a whole. This affected Alfa Romeo deeply, who were trying to bring themselves back into their luxury roots. But they were struggling to do this, and they thought they needed something that would really stand out, much like Ferrari and Maserati had done around the same time, and Bugatti in France and whatnot. They had come back kind of roaring into power with just incredible cars. So Alfa Romeo called up their good old friend Giuseppe Bertone, and Bertone was put in charge of coming up with a concept car for them. However, they wanted a concept car that would test the boundaries of aerodynamics. So you gotta keep in mind that this is after World War II, and the jet engine had been invented, and the jet set were flying around like the set of Mad Men, smoking away, and basically putting themselves on a dangerous plane with no autopilot and then smoking and drinking for the entire thing instead. How that lasted for as long as it did, I don't know. But by regulations today, that wouldn't have been allowed. But they wanted to kind of take from the aeronautics industry and come up with a very, very streamlined car that would be able to go a lot faster, be a lot better on fuel and that sort of thing. And this wasn't really done at the time, so they figured this would stand out. So they passed this over to Giuseppe Bertone, and he put one of his engineers to work. Of course, he took the best person he could find, a guy who had been with the company for a year. However, this guy is pretty good, and I am of course talking about Franco Scaglione, who designed the Lamborghini 350 GTV, a video you can watch here, along with the Lancia Balboni the year before, which is just a beautiful car, absolutely beautiful. Scaglione jumped straight in, and the reason he was actually put in charge of this is he had a background as a wing designer for the aeronautics industry. So he was the perfect person to put in charge of designing something aerodynamic, and that's exactly what he set to. So the project as a whole took the name of the Berlinetta Aerodynamic Technica. And what that essentially means is Berlinetta is the Italian for little sedan or little saloon. And the reason for that is basically a lot of the Italian car companies called their two-seater coupes Berlinettas for a little sedan or a little saloon. So this was a Berlinetta because it was going to be a two-seater coupe, but it was also a very aerodynamic and technically challenging car, therefore the Berlinetta Aerodynamic Technica, or BAT for short. And that's what he started working on, and the first of these concepts would be shown off at the 1953 Turin Auto Show. So the first one of these cars was the Bat 5, which was introduced at the 1953 Turin Auto Show, and it was nothing short of incredible. The design that he had came up with was a highly aerodynamic design that had a front designed to push the air around and move it in the least interruptive way around the body of the car, which would help the car to just glide through the air. This went on around the sides of the car, and the wheels were covered as well. And the reason the wheels were covered is when the wheels are turning, they create different air vortices which would upset the flow of air around the side of the car. So these were covered as well. Now there was a slight issue with this, which was when you were driving the car, you couldn't turn the wheels fully because they would hit the side fenders, but this was a concept car. This then continued on as the windshield was 45 degrees. The roof was basically flat just to let air glide up the windshield and over. And at the back he had some tail fins to finish off the streamlining, which just looked amazing. He also had the split rear window, which is later famous on the Corvette. And this car was very aerodynamic. It was a 1100 kilo car, which was very light for the materials at the time, and it was built on the chassis of the Alfa Romeo 1900, which is a sedan they were producing already, which would have been quite heavy as a luxury sedan. So this was a pretty epic ordeal to get it down to that light, but also on top of that, it had a drag coefficient of just 0.23, which is very low, and you'll understand how low when I give you some examples when you see the next couple of prototypes. In this car, they fitted a 100 brake horsepower 1884cc engine from their normal Aston Martin 1900. However, because of the lightweight and the aerodynamics, it wouldn't do 100 miles an hour, it would do 120 miles an hour. Now again, this doesn't seem like a lot, but you've got to keep in mind in 1948, a short 5 years earlier, the XK120 from Jaguar with a 3.5 litre straight six, which you can watch here, was released, and that was a 120 mile an hour car, and at the time in 1948 it was the fastest production car in the world. So 120 miles an hour in the early 50s was actually quite quick. This wasn't the last you'd see of the back concepts though, and Franco Scaglione and Alfa Romeo returned to the Turin Auto Show in 1954 with the upgraded Bat 7. Now this car was essentially a similar design, however it actually had headlights. The wheels would turn fully inside of the fenders that were covering them, and the back fins were toned down ever so slightly, not to look as ridiculous. However, this car was highly engineered and aerodynamic as well, and its drag coefficient was only 0.19. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, but what you've got to keep in mind is almost $1 billion of engineering was put into making the GM EV1, which you can watch here, into production, including marketing and whatnot, and then GM tried to kill it, but that's beside the point. My point is that car was released in 1996 with the exact same drag coefficient. So Scaglione did an amazing job here. Unfortunately, it didn't really go anywhere other than a concept, but I reckon he was probably happy he got to design a Lamborghini a short 10 years later. Finally, in 1955, the last ever Bat car for 50 years was shown off again at the Turin Auto Show, and this time Scaglione had designed something that closer resembled other Alfa Romeos of the time. The design is very Alfa Romeo, except it still has those sweeping fins that were found on luxury European and US cars at the time. You've probably seen them on Cadillacs and whatnot. It had headlights that were in the right place. It had a driver position that was in the right place, and it looked like a somewhat exotic production car. The problem with this is it didn't get much attention at the 55 Turin Auto Show because it looked quite similar to some other stuff that was going on there. And this is in and around the same time. I believe it's the year before the Lincoln Futura, which I'm going to do a video on at some point. If you want, let me know in the comments, was released, which went on to be the Batmobile. So unfortunately, not enough to consider putting it into production. As I said, unfortunately what happened with this car was it was nothing more than a concept, and Alfa Romeo would never put it into production because they realized that they couldn't compete on luxury cars or sports cars at the time, and they instead decided to go with mass marketing and mass producing smaller, more affordable vehicles, and Alfa Romeo did very, very successfully with that, as you're probably aware of today. However, they did come back and make some one-off sports cars with Ferrari engines, as they were bought by Fiat and Fiat Chrysler nowadays, and made some epic cars. As for these three concept cars, I'm not sure if they're in museums now. All I know is that at one point in the 1980s, these cars were bought by a Japanese businessman for $18 million, who then restored them. He had to restore them because the fins were taken off in the 60s and 70s by the guy who owned them during that period, who decided to turn them into race cars and take them racing. So this Japanese businessman bought them for $18 million and restored them. And you're probably thinking, what a solid investment. They can only go up in price. You'd be wrong. In the 1990s, the three cars were sold once again in Coys of London for only £4 million. And if you know what's going on with them today, please do let me know. I would love to see that in the comments. Apart from that, then the BAT 11 was introduced in the early 2000s as a concept as well, and kind of a renaissance to this style of thinking, and just a showpiece from Alfa Romeo, nothing more once again, but it did look pretty cool. So that's it for today's episode. Tomorrow, due to a comment request, I'm going to be covering the Triumph, Triumph. I'm not going to tell you which yet, because that'll give it away, and I'm going to use this as well as an apology to Leyland for insulting them so often, but that should be fun, and there'll be an article about that on Drive Tribe later tonight or some point tomorrow. But you can watch the video here again tomorrow at 3 p.m. CT. Monday to Friday is when I'm going to be launching these videos now, and don't forget to subscribe if you already haven't. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to click one of those. Like now.